Hi. Well, to enter into the theme of Greek politics, or I guess what I'm saying is the invention of politics in ancient Greece, I want to first talk a little bit more about Antigone, that we were talking about last time. We were talking about the second chorus. I want to talk a little bit more about the actual play, and then lead that into talking a little bit about the history and then some other writings. But so the play, you know, like we noted last time, it's from 442 BC. It's a traditional story. You will find reference to these figures in much older traditions, like the Iliad and so on. But the Greek, the Athenian tragedians, the guys who wrote tragedies, most prominently Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, took those traditional stories and told them in a way that was meaningful to their contemporary audience. And so even though they're stories taken from the older tradition of ancient Greece, in many ways they reflect more the issues of the time when they were written, the late, the 400s BC. Anyway, that I think that might be relevant in a minute. Anyway, but the basic story, according to the play, is that it's a story more or less about the children and the subsequent history of the family of Oedipus, the famous guy who killed his father, had sex with his mother, blinded himself, and so on. You probably know that story. In any case, we're in his city of Thebes after he's gone. And the city is officially being run by Polynices, and Eteocles, who are brothers, and his sons. And they also have two sisters, Antigone and Ismene. Now, the relevant thing about Polynices, I'll call him Polynices. Like I said, the Greek word is Polynikos, which means many struggles. But Polynices is how it's translated, and that's kind of the Latinized, anglicized version. Polynices and Eteocles Eteocles means true glory. They basically supposedly have an agreement that one's going to run it for a while and the other's going to run it for a while, and so on. But what happens is that Polynices comes back when it's supposedly his turn to rule, and Eteocles won't let him do that, and so they have a fight in which they're both killed. But that's sort of the background to this play. And then what has happened is the person who's then going to rule instead of the dead guy, Eteocles, is Creon, who I guess is their uncle. And Creon makes an edict. He dictates that Eteocles, who was the ruler, will be buried as he should be. But Polynices, because he was invading the city, is a traitor, and therefore he won't be buried. He'll just be left, his dead body will just be left on the ground to rot and to be picked at by birds and dogs and so on. That's the setting of the story. The play begins with Antigone, the sister of both of those guys, and I guess the niece of Creon. She hears that edict and she says, "No way, I'm going to go bury my brother." And the reason is because she believes that to be basically a law, the God's command. Like it just is the responsibility of people to bury the dead, and it's especially the responsibility of the family members to care for that. So she says, "He's my brother. He's a member of my family, my brother in particular, and I owe it to him to bury him, and I can't live in a world where we just leave him out there. It'd be violating my sense of who I am, be violating what I think he deserves, be violating the laws of the gods, and so on." And so she goes out and buries him, and Creon, her uncle, finds out that somebody buried him, and he says, whoever did that has to die. And then only later does he find out that it's his niece. And then they have a big conflict, and he sentences her to death. He locks her up in a cave. She commits suicide. She was going to marry his son. His son, does he commit suicide too? Maybe. He's pretty mad at his dad. Everything goes wrong. But so, that's the core story. She buries him when it's against the law. He condemns her to death. They argue. He sentences her to death, and then everything goes bad. Everybody dies. The reason that I want to focus on it, it's a great story. It's a great play. But I want to focus on a couple of themes from it. The one is the character of the conflict between Antigone and Creon. When you read the play, it's very hard not to see Antigone as kind of the hero, because she's really taking a stand, on her duty and her moral responsibility. She seems like a selfless, committed person who's doing what's right just because it's right. So she seems like a figure of, conscience and integrity, and so it's hard not to like her for that reason. And the place called Antigone, it's hard not to think she's the star, and that in a way she's in the right. But it seems to me the actual issues in the play are a bit more complicated than that. So she's taking a stand against Creon, and Creon says, look, it's the law. First of all, I made the law for a reason, because that guy was a traitor. And second, I made the law, and I'm the guy in charge. You got to obey that. And so there's a real conflict in the play that comes out between, should we obey the divine laws, or should we obey the human laws? Should we do what the gods tell us, or should we do what the government tells us? In particular individuals. And Antigone obviously takes her stand on the one. Creon takes his stand on the other. And there are some great speeches, and I'm not going to go through it in detail, but there are some great speeches in there where people speak in defense of these things. But so that's the first issue, is that this sort of opposition between divine law and human law. But that's then closely correlated with a second issue. Antigone, in defending the divine law, is protecting her brother, or doing what she thinks it takes to protect her brother, namely to bury him. And so her stand is on divine law. She takes a stand on divine law, but that is simultaneously a stand on the family, that the bonds of her family trump, overrule any other kinds of demands. And Creon is taking a stand on human law, but in doing that, he's also taking a stand on the city. He's saying the thing that you really have to answer to are the rules of the city, and sometimes the rules of the city conflict with the interests of the particular family. So really there's that conflict between them. It seems to me revolves more than anything around those two issues. There are other things it revolves around too. He's a man and she's a woman, and so that's an issue too. So that's a little bit more complex, I'll say just a little bit about that in a moment. But the thing I really wanted to get out of that story was the basic conflict between divine law and the family on the one side, and human law and the state, or the city, on the other side. As I said, Antigone in a way seems like the hero. But even ignoring those conflicts that I just talked about, I want you to think a little bit more carefully about that. You have to read the play to really see what you think, but even just on the basis of my little short telling of the story, I want you to think about that. Think about what she's taking a stand on. She's taking a stand on obeying the divine laws. And then I want you to ask yourself what you think about that stand. Do you think we should do what Zeus commands? Do you think we should do what Demeter commands? If Demeter commands things, I guess she does. Should we do what Artemis commands? Artemis commands things for sure. My guess is that you don't think so. My guess is that you don't actually believe in Zeus and Artemis and Demeter. And so when almost anybody reads this play, almost always people come up with the view that she's the hero, which is fine. There are good reasons for that, just a strong character and so on. But it's pretty important to ask yourself, what is it that she's taking a stand on? And she's taking a stand on doing the things that Zeus commands, which means she's taking a stand on the well, I guess I could say, do you think she knows what Zeus commands? And if you answer that, I have to say, do you believe in Zeus? If you don't believe in Zeus, which I bet you don't, then I bet you don't believe there is anything that Zeus commands. And so therefore she couldn't possibly know what Zeus commands. So she's responding to something, right? Well, she's responding to the things that have been handed down in various ways over generations, probably changing as they go, of some traditional values that are imputed to the gods or attributed to the gods, but it's really, the thing she's taking a stand on just is the traditional structure of that society. Doesn't mean the values that she has in mind are wrong. Doesn't mean they're wrong. Doesn't mean they're right either, though. My question, or my concern, really is, what are those things she's taking a stand on? She's taking a stand on those traditional things. She's also taking a stand on the family in opposition to the state. And there's a kind of a relationship there, right? She actually believes that she, as a sister, has a certain responsibility to her brother. If she were married and were now with some other man in some other family, her responsibilities would change. Probably she'd be responsible for his family and her children with him. But right now she's not married, so that family she came from her point of view, she owes them everything. And so she defines herself as a sister. And later she would define herself as a wife and as a mother. That doesn't just mean she happens to be a sister or a wife or mother. It means that's how she defines herself. Right? She takes her understanding of who she is from the role she's been handed in the family, and which is to say the traditional interpretation of who she's supposed to be. So yes, going back to an earlier point, the conflict is also a conflict between a woman and a man, but it's important to notice that Antigone is actually taking a stand on those traditional roles. Further interesting thing, she's doing that in the very context of violating them, because in taking that stand, opposing the man who is the king, and doing this thing, she's quite wildly going outside in that society what the traditional roles of the woman would specify. First of all, she's taking a public action she should not be doing. Second, she's opposing the man. She shouldn't be doing that. So her own actions are the very ones that people might admire, are themselves violating the very norms she claims to be defending. We could probably say similar things about Creon too. There's probably lots to say criticizing him. For my purposes, that's not my interest. I want to just focus on Antigone and the things she's taking a stand on. And I want to add one more thing. I said that the Greek tragedies retell the stories of the ancient, or of the traditional oral myths that were handed down, but they tell them in a way that's relevant to their time. The sense of being relevant to their time I'm going to explain in a minute, but I do want to say one thing in advance of that about how the stories get told. One of the things the Greek tragedies are characteristically about is the family. But one of the things that they do is they pretty consistently portray the family as a site of pretty awful things, as something kind of inherently dysfunctional. So they're carrying over traditional stories, but these are the stories they pick, and this is the way they play them out. So they're playing up, in the context of Oedipus, the themes of incest and brother to brother murder, or in Aeschylus's Oresteia, in the first play Agamemnon, first play of that trilogy. That's Oresteia is a trilogy. The first play of that, called the Agamemnon, it's the story of Agamemnon coming home from the Trojan War with his prize, which is another woman that's going to be his girl, and his wife Clytemnestra kills him. It's another dysfunctional family. It had a history of dysfunctionality, though, because he sacrificed his daughter before the Trojan War in order that he could have good winds to go fight. And that's what his wife. That's one of the things his wife is upset about. I think she's also not thrilled with him coming home with Cassandra, but she's really not happy that he sacrificed Iphigenia. There are other things, other stories about the family, but that's the other thing I wanted just to mention about these Greek tragedies. Yeah, they're telling traditional stories, but in their very portrayal, they're putting on display something about the family and its dysfunctionality. So all of those things together is the that's the really quick summary of this play by Sophocles, and a few things that I want you to think about. And so we could really play this out much longer, but I want to bring it in fairly quickly because I want to move on to some other writings. But just to get you thinking, I'd like you to think about that conflict between the family and the city, intimately related to the conflict between the human law and the divine law. But I think I will talk about the family and the city first, and then maybe about the other one after. But I just want you to think in your own contemporary situation. In a minute, we're going to see what the Greek situation is, and that will add extra excitement. But just in your contemporary situation, I want you to think about the difference between the family and the city, and think about, or the family and the state, what they are to us and what we count on them for. I'll say a handful of things, but I would hope you would think about it yourself, and you can probably come up with a richer and more interesting answer than the few things I'll say. But one, in the family, you're a person. Like it's not indifferent who you are and who your family members are, right? The family is a relationship of particular people who in some way relate to each other as individuals. The city or the state is kind of built around anonymity. Every one of us is an equal member. So on the one hand, the city is more a site of indifference, where the family is more of a site of intimacy. On the other hand, that indifference, so that can sound like you might think, oh, I'd rather have the family than the city. On the other hand, the good thing about the city is everybody's equal. In the family, everybody isn't equal. Dad, or maybe mom, or maybe dad and the mom. Some set of one of those or some of those are the boss or is the boss. Often, as in the case of Antigone, the boys are treated differently than the girls and are given a superior standing. And in any case, one family is different from another, and you kind of got to live with how your parents handle things. I mean, like you might have a nice mom and dad, you might have a shitty mom and dad, and you're stuck. So the family can also be a kind of a prison, right? Whereas the city, it's like you can go out there as an individual and do whatever you want, and you're free and equal and anonymous compared to everybody else. So there's one way to start thinking about the contrast. So, intimacy versus indifference, but also being bound to a kind of hierarchy isn't quite the right word, but something like that, to roles, to prescribed roles, versus being not bound and basically equal to anybody else. That's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is maybe, this is kind of related to that, but maybe I guess it's pretty directly related, but it's another facet of it. You may have aspirations or desires that are different from the ones the rest of the family has. So you may very well want to leave the family to go out into the larger public world. You may want to go off and do different things, and you can do that in the city. Whereas if you're stuck in the life of the family, especially in not just any old family, but in a society that really emphasizes the family, you're going to grow up and you're going to do what your family wants you to do. You're going to do the family business, and you're probably going to stick around home. Think about a couple of examples too. And this is still hanging around more or less the same thing, but sometimes parents aren't very nice to their children, and we call the police to take the children out. I don't need to tell gruesome stories, but I imagine I could tell a gruesome story where you would think, yeah, I want the state to intervene and save that little girl. When you think about that, you say, yeah, I want there to be a state that has powers that trump the powers of the family. On the other hand, you might think there are other ways that the state is inappropriately invasive in family life. It could be something as simple as requiring that you have smoke detectors in your house. You might think, I don't want to do that. I'm prepared to take the risk, but the state says, no, we got to do that. And they could push that further. Like maybe they're going to say, you have to have a surveillance camera in your house, or you have to have a recording device so that we can listen to what you say, right? That same thing, which is the state coming in to protect the abused daughter, it's not really different from the state coming with all kinds of other surveillance. It's just a question of where the limit is. And so I would think I would think almost certainly that you can think of ways in which you would say, yeah, I want the state to be superior to the family. But then I bet you can also think of other ways in which you say, oh, I think the state is intervening too much in the domain of the family. So I would just like you to think about those things as kind of the basic theme that's raised for any of us, by a philosophical theme that's raised for any of us by reading Antigone. But now I want to go back and I want to talk a little bit more about the actual the real context of Greece and ultimately Athens. Well, Athens and Sparta in particular. But I want to talk about the context of Greece with respect to those issues and how Antigone relates to them. So I want to now talk a little bit about the issue of family and city in ancient Greece, and I'll talk a little bit, sort of off the top of my head about history. But then we're going to turn to the readings from Thucydides, Pericles' funeral oration, and from Xenophon on the Constitution of the Spartans, and so on. And we'll talk more specifically about the reality of family and city in ancient Greece and why that's important.